So preparing this talk for this workshop means a lot to me. So I deliberately prepare some gifts for all the audience towards the end, and you will see that. And this talk is absolutely first presentation in the world, talking about how to do the fair pricing from my personal perspective. I believe Philip has a strong interest later because it's more like standing from the regulator's perspective, what fair pricing could look like. So the workshop is about AI, but I want to say in terms of fair pricing, AI does not change things. AI does not create a new problem. It just amplifies an existing one. It's really the scale and the speed that make things different, but the fundamental issue is exactly the same. In 50 years ago, if we talk about fair pricing, it's actually exactly the same problem. So what do we mean by fair? This is always the largest difficulty that I have when I deliver any talk on fairness. So let's first align our understanding of fairness in this talk. So fairness is really an overloaded concept. If you ask 10 people on the street, what do you mean by fair? You got 10 different answers. So here I broadly categorize fairness into 3 categories. The first one is anti-discrimination. That usually have protected attributes. And then it involves direct discrimination, that you directly use the protected attributes, indirect discrimination, that you don't directly use that, but there are still some proxy effects, and usually there are some legal standards. That's why people are concerned about that, because that's really, you need to do things correct, otherwise there are some compliance issues. The second category is about some competing notions of fairness, and we have been talking about this in the panel discussion, that say, should we give a risk-based pricing more towards actuarial fairness, or should we make it more social justice, that's like more community rating and lots of cross subsidies, or we make a choice-sensitive fairness. So that's the different fairness notions. It does not involve protected attributes, but it involves thinking about who should bear the cost. Should we make people or make the society? The third category is around consumer trust and promises. It's more like insurers, you need to keep your promise. If you say, I give the customer 10% discount, you must make sure that you realize your promise. So it's related to codes of practice, promises, and product disclosure. So here in this talk, I will only focus on the anti-discrimination one. And for algorithmic pricing, it's, as I mentioned earlier, it does not create a new problem, but it does make things more complex. So think about now insurers could potentially use lots of attributes. It's like including both legitimate variables that traditionally insurers use, but also more external data sets. And those external data sets could potentially have some correlation with protected attributes. And that's what's the reason that makes the problem difficult to understand and difficult to solve. So you got inputs into the black box model, and you got a premium out. So potentially the way to think about fair insurance pricing is that how can we make sure that when we have the complex black box model, when we have the big data sets, how can we make sure that the price does not contain both direct and indirect discrimination with respect to protected attributes? And it would usually include some anti-discrimination regulations from the regulator's perspective. They specify the protected attributes and sometimes fairness testing procedures. And then it also involves some fairness criteria that in the fair machine learning community and other research areas, people have developing many different qualitative fairness criteria. So fairness is like, even within anti-discrimination, there are so many different fairness criteria that for the insurance industry, the number one task is to identify which fairness criteria are applicable. Not everyone is applicable to the industry and to your the specific lines of business. So I would say the 4 big questions to tackle from my perspective is, and they are all super difficult questions. The first one is, which fairness metric should we use? as I mentioned, there are so many different metrics, and later on I'll give you a very quick overview. There can be individual fairness, can be group fairness, and the metrics, they are not compatible with each other. So there has been research showing that you can't really realize like 3 metrics together at the same time. What does it imply? It means that you really need to pick up the ones that you like and you believe is suitable. And protected attributes may be unavailable. That's another difficulty, because in order to apply the fairness metric to make sure that your model is fair, almost every fairness criteria requests you to collect the protected attributes. But in reality, insurers don't collect the protected attributes. So that's why it leads to use the BIFSG, Giles just mentioned, some proxy method, and that's create new problems as well. So which fairness metric should we use? I would say the context matters. If we think about it, if it's talking about health insurance or life insurance or auto insurance, climate insurance, they may prefer different fairness metrics. Either it's individual fairness or either it's group fairness. The second question is, which outcome should be fair? Should we focus on targeting the final premium? Should we target the markup? If we target the markup, that means that you already consider the claims cost. You only want to make sure that anything on top of the claims cost is fair. Or do you want to look at the loss ratios? So there are different things. And my research also showed that you can't achieve everything at the same time. If you choose to be fair in terms of premiums, you can't be fair in terms of markups. So you need to make a decision here. That's another difficulty. So the stakeholders need to sit together and say, which outcome should we make it fair? The third one is who gains and who loses. If we only look at the quantitative fairness models and fairness criteria, we actually are missing one of the very important questions about how about consumer welfare, how about firm profit, how about the competition in the market. It's more like economic thinkings behind all these fairness discussions. So some of my other papers are trying to answer this question. So it's like we also need to understand what's the real impact on consumers and the firms. So that would require some economic modeling. And the last question is, how should the fairness be audited? So that's also more like the regulatory thinking, that if you have a pricing model, usually the pricing outputs are deterministic. That means you specify some policy holders profile, like the age, gender, and what car they drive. Then you give them one price, right? You don't make a draw of like a random. You don't make a random draw from a population pool. So this actually creates some discussions, and also one of the papers that Giles and I have wrote about, that is because the pricing outputs are deterministic. That means the standard deviation that you calculate, you can't really use the traditional one, the standard one. That's assume the errors are IID. Because the pricing outputs are deterministic, the difference between the pricing outputs and your the combination, linear combination of the regressors and the coefficients, they are correlated with each other. So it actually does not satisfy the traditional assumptions. So we need correct the statistical tests. So if you want to do regression tests to test the fairness, like Colorado or New York State, they have been proposing some regression tests, then we need to be very careful how you calculate the standard errors, because that's really impact your p-values. So my suggestion about the pathway towards fairness is that there are 4 models here. The first one is we need to be clear about our inputs. Which fairness should we use? Do we want to make the individual-based fairness that is more towards actuarial fairness, or do we want to make it more group fairness? Like, say, 2 different gender groups, on average, their prices are the same. And also, we need to be clear who are the protected attributes. This is easy. The legal documents should document down clearly. And who are the legitimate variables, and what are the non-traditional variables, external variables that you use. And for these inputs, there could be some data, human, and historical bias that we need to be cautious with. The second module is a fair pricing model. You take all these inputs, and you can do pre-processing or in-processing or post-processing to make your model potentially satisfy those fairness metrics. But here you also need to be clear who are your outputs. As I mentioned earlier, if you target your quote the premium, make them fair, you can't make the markup fair. So you need to pick up which is the output you're really concerned about. And then it could be quoted premium, could be a proven decision, yes or no, it could be loss ratio, could be markup, or could be something else, consumer welfare or consumer utility. So this one is also something you need to specify. And then we can do fairness testing. That is, we can, based on your outputs, based on all the things you have specified, let's do a regression test, collect some data from the insurers to see whether it's pass the fairness test or fail or unclear. And if it's fail or unclear, then we go back to the fair pricing model to fix things, to remediate and to re-audit. And in addition to these 4 modules, we also need to do a welfare implications modeling to understand what's the real impact on firm profits and consumer welfare, and also potentially the competition in the markets. So that's what I think the full ingredients we need to understand in order to do a fairness testing. And let's go back to one of the key ingredients here, that's the fairness matrix. I mentioned earlier that there are so many different fairness criteria. So by working with the SOA and the Milliman, we have a fairness matrix for life insurance products. That was a report published earlier this year. And this is a plot from the report that we can see broadly. This is not a complete list, but you can see how complex the problem is. We can do fairness between individuals, and then you can do fairness through awareness. So this is something that we don't recommend. That's basically, but that's the current practice, that you just drop the protected attributes, and then you model all the remaining ones. But this could still lead to some biased impact. And then you can do fairness through awareness. That's another fair machine learning metric. Or you can do no omitted variable bias. That's like, this is related to proxy discrimination. That is, by including the protected attributes in the regression model, the coefficients of the other variables, that does not change. So that means there's no proxy discrimination. So I would say these 3 are more close to the individual-based fairness. For group fairness, these are the 3 common in the fair machine learning literature. We have independence. Your outcome and the protected attributes, they are independent. Or separation, conditional on what you observed, the true observations, and then the decisions are independent with the protected attributes, or conditional on the decisions. The observed observations are independent with those protected attributes, with sufficiency. So there are different group fairness metrics. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the context matters, which one to use. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Another one is that our award-winning paper with my PhD student Xi Xin is also discussed the different fairness metrics and implement that as fair machine learning models. Okay, another thing I want to mention about, in addition to the fairness metrics related to protected attributes, we can also, and we should also look at the different fairness regulations that are not directly targeting protected attributes, but actually has an impact on the outcome. For example, many U.S. insurance state regulators have banned price optimization in the personal line since 2015. And we wanted to understand what are the welfare implications of such bans, what are the implications for consumers and firms. And also UK has the price walking ban that's similar to price optimization, but actually it's a weaker ban, only ban the renewal pricing going up for the same policyholders with the same profile. So another topic that if we go back here, so next I'm going to talk about how can we model the welfare implications for firms and consumers here in this pathway. So we have I have 2 papers on this, working with some economists, looking at doing some structural economic modeling to understand the welfare implications of fair and accountable insurance pricing. So the model structure is that we assume that this is an optimization problem that the insurers are facing, that they try to minimize the loss function between the target variable and the loss of the function of the features, and is subject to some fairness constraints. So this is an optimization problem that they want to find out what's the best pricing model for their customers. And then traditionally we can have the cost modeling step, which is usually a machine learning step that we model claims frequency, severity using GLM or some random forest machine learning models. So usually in people in the literature and also in some practice, people have been focusing a lot on fair machine learning. That's looking mainly on the cost modeling or claims modeling. But in this paper, we want to emphasize that the fairness in machine learning or in the cost modeling step does not mean you achieve fairness in the outcome. Because in order to achieve the outcome, usually the insurers also do some demand modeling. Although in the US, I know because of price optimization ban, you probably don't do that. I'm not sure if that's still the practice, but in Australia, people do that. The insurers do demand modeling and price optimization. So that means the pricing decisions actually can deviate a lot from pure claim-based, risk-based pricing. So this can deviate a lot from the actuarial fair pricing. So what we are arguing is that we need to, and modeling the full pricing process from cost modeling, demand modeling, all the way to the final market premium. And then we also model the consumer's choices and consumer's welfare and firm profit based on some structural economics literature to understand how the consumers make choices and how and also calculate the firm's profit under different fairness constraints. So because of the time, I will just quickly show you some of our findings. The first findings that we want to ask, is the fair insurance pricing a fair machine learning problem? The answer is no. What we show is that if we apply the fairness metrics in the machine learning step, you cannot achieve the same fairness criteria in the outcome pricing step because of all those middle layers that you need to consider. And also, if you want, another tension is that, as I mentioned earlier, you need to decide, do you want to achieve fairness in price or fairness in markups? So price equalization removes price gaps, but widens markup gaps. And another thing is that we also tested the price optimization ban on firms and consumers. We found that it really depends on the market conditions. There's no clear answers to whether it's like benefiting the consumers or benefiting the firms. And the second finding is that how to evaluate the fairness criteria. We want to emphasize that the fairness and accuracy trade-off, the fairness accuracy trade-off should be dropped, that we should look at the fairness and welfare trade-off to better understand what's the real impact on consumers rather than just look at the accuracy of the machine learning algorithm. So what we found is that decreased machine learning accuracy by only 0.5% can decrease 5% of profit and consumer welfare. So that's another reason why you need to look at the welfare. Okay, next I'm going to use like 5 minutes to talk about the paper with Giles on the fairness testing for algorithmic pricing. So this is the motivation is really from the regulatory framework. So I put two proposed draft regulations here. One is the Colorado draft regulation. Another one is the New York State's regulation on the how to do the fairness testing. So I just summarized them here. Both of them provided some regressions, so that they advocate for doing some regressions with protected or with non-traditional variables as the regressors. So, for example, let's look at the proxy discrimination one for the Colorado. So in this regulation document, they didn't say this is doing proxy discrimination. They just say do two regressions. But that's my interpretation. After reading this, I feel like, okay, you probably want to remove proxy discrimination. So I gave it a name. This is doing two proxy discrimination. So what they do is that they firstly regress with non-traditional variables plus protected attributes. That's the first regression. The second regression is remove the protected attributes and then flag any non-traditional variables whose coefficients shifts between the models. So that's a proposed test. Or you can do some conditional demographic parity test. Again, the second regression, the regulatory document did not say anything about this name. I just, after reading that, I feel like this is mapping to the conditional demographic parity. And also for the race, there's no collected race, but you do need the race to protect attributes in this regression in order to do a fairness testing. So then in both regulations, they mention specifically use BIFSD to do the proxy. And then they use either logistic regression or linear regression as the models. So we can see that motivated by these two regulations. I summarized the mathematics here. So basically, for example, for the proxy discrimination, the goal is that the rating variable act as a statistical substitute for the protected attributes. We do two regressions, and we test whether there's a coefficient shifts. So this is a math we need to test. And the problem is that the pricing outputs are deterministic. So that means the standard audit statistics assumes random residuals. This one it's not satisfied anymore. So we need to correct this. That will have an impact on the standard deviations. And then we also have noticed that for all the regulations, there's no mentioning of fairness standards. They just say these are the regressions, do it. I would recommend that we attach which fairness notion do you mean and why we are doing these two regressions. Wrong test. So lots of in the literature, the significant test we can specify the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. I feel like you could do like the null hypothesis as fair, but not rejecting that does not mean it's absolutely fair. So that's the tension here, and we advocate for putting the non-fairness as a null hypothesis. So to give the insurers the responsibility to prove that you are fair, you need to reject it now. And then there's no protocol in the existing regulation. They just say do this regression, but we need a clear protocol that from the beginning collect what data sets and targeting what customers, and then what if the result is fail or proof. So we advocate for a proper protocol to do this fairness testing. So let's correct these problems. The first solution is that because the pricing outputs are deterministic, to correct that, we can use a sandwich estimator to correct the correlations of the residuals. And then we advocate for move from significance testing to equivalent testing. So that means the null hypothesis move from fairness to non-fairness, but you also give them a tolerance level. So you can say maybe 0.8 or 0.9, whatever, the threshold the regulators and the stakeholders believe is appropriate. And also, there are some good properties by having this one as equivalent testing. It also has impact on when you have a large sample or small sample, then that makes more sense for the insurers to prove they are fair. And this is a proposed auditing framework that you start with, set up the pre-audit the requirements, and then go to collect some samples, and then you do the fairness testing, and then you have 3 results, either pass or fail or insufficiency. And then you can, for the fail or insufficient information, then you can do the remediations. Or you can, if there's insufficient information, you can go back to collect more data and then do this again. And then you can do a retest if you need to do this remediation. And we used the Illinois postcode level premium to do a testing for our empirical analysis. So we did different fairness testing in our paper, but here just show you one of them. For example, for proxy discrimination, it's a huge impact before and after the correction of the standard deviation formula. So you can see that if you use the standard formula, no company is flat. So every company passes. No proxy discrimination. But if you correct the formula, that means you got the smaller confidence intervals. And then all the companies are significant. Everyone has a proxy impact. So that means actually the correction has a very significant impact on the results. And if we apply like another criteria based on the threshold, then 16 of 34 meet both criteria, but in the traditional method, none of them meet the criteria. So correct the standard error on average has a 92% smaller than the independent sample standard error. So that means why, that indicates why it's very important to do the correction. Okay, so the fair pricing playbook is that I advocate for, the step one is that you need to be clear what you mean by fair. And step two is that design fair pricing models to satisfy your fairness. And also remember to tell me, do you want the premium to be fair or claims cost to be fair or the markup to be fair? And then we need to understand the impact on consumers and the firms because accuracy is not the whole story. And number four, we need to audit the system by doing the fairness testing with the right standard error and also the right hypothesis testing. And to make it available to everyone, I developed a website, and you can scan this. I open sourced the codes to do all of this. And of course, there are lots of space to improve that. So if you're an insurer or researcher or regulator, and you have any suggestions for me to improve, or any feedback is welcome. But this is all acceptable, and all the codes, all the data is open access. So this is my recommended playbook. And before I finish, I want to say there's another open learning material that, especially if you're academic, that I open source my Actuarial data science. That's accredited by Australian Actuaries Institute. That's our Part 2 exemption related material. And there are some innovations I incorporate, not only those core syllabus, but also every year I engage with the insurer to do an industry challenge, use insurance data sets. So I found this very, very beneficial for all parties. So I recommend this. And also I played a sound list covering with AI assistance, covering each topic. And my daughter loves it. My students love it. And I recommend you to listen to it. Okay, that's all.
Thank you. I think we have some time for questions.
Yeah.
So the auditing seems pretty helpful. I want to get a sense of how does this play into, I can imagine, designing a system in two ways, right? We can do like a top-down versus a bottom-up approach. I'm thinking about Giles' thing where it's like, we're just going to say, insurers, do what you want, just don't use these characteristics. And then as he demonstrated, you can just futz around in areas where nothing ever happens to get the objective of no discrimination. That's like the bottom-up approach. How does that square with like the top-down approach of just like, we decide what are the things that you can use? Like say for home insurance, okay, your roof matters, your credit score, maybe we can discuss, like why does it matter, if who lives in the house for home insurance, and maybe we decide, that's not fair, even if it has predictive value for the insurer. Like, I guess how do these kind of square? Because I assume you let insurers loose, they're going to come up with 1,000 variables, and we might not like all of them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I fully, got your questions.
Well, I guess is that something that'll be picked up in the audit?
Yeah, but, I would say what Giles mentioned is more from the explanation perspective. This one is more like, I think it's a slightly different perspective. It's more like, how can we do fair testing? So if for example, so this is more regression-based fair testing that we need to do, like collect the premium and collect some attributes. But what's in the earlier talk what Giles mentioned is more like especially the California, that they say, give me a plot showing that the age has no impact. If that's the case, then that's a method to use.
I should specify, like, you can probably tell that somebody is inputting age or the credit score, right, as part of the inputs to their system. This is a matter of saying, we want to control how much impact it has. But that's separate from, look, I know I don't have race in my system, but maybe I'm using something that's effectively letting me impute it. And that's much more of what Fei has been talking about.
Yeah, yes. Dan first?
So this is really interesting. you guys are really good at statistics. Okay, really sophisticated. I want to tell you, as like someone who's not in this field, it's hard, right? And that leads to my question. How confident are you that if we try to implement this in the real world, where insurers are doing this, and then we have regulators who make less money, fewer resources, don't have the sophistication that you have, then we're going to get the results you want to get? I mean, isn't it sort of inevitable that if we're requiring the level of statistical sophistication you're imagining, that the industry is going to run circles around the regulators?
That's a really good question. And I made a post, LinkedIn post about my fairness testing paper, and got lots of practitioners raising, similar questions. The number one question is, does regulator really have the statistical rigor to understand this? So I think that's probably a reason why we should collaborate, to make sure that the knowledge and also the technique we can raise the statistical literacy of all the stakeholders.
Also open source software.
But don't regulators also hire actuaries?
Yeah, not only do we hire them, in our toolbox is the ability to actually contract with vendors and have them build back to the company. So if we don't have something to our satisfaction, we want to dig deeper, we're worried about it, we can contract with a firm with the expertise that has to be paid for by the company to get us to a level where we're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And that whole confidentiality, seeing data and everything, that transfers under our authority to do it. So we do have different tools.
Yeah, and I mean, academics, we are also happy to, have like this kinds of collaboration.
Right.
Yeah, don't forget us.
No, I wanted to, similarly answer Dan. The regulatory hirings an external firm is one answer. Another answer could be, financial and accounting is very difficult. We have yearly audits, and the Big Four or other accounting firms are assessing that the accounting is true. We could think about a similar process where the companies who are using a model, have to audit with an external firm to make sure that their model is fair according to good criteria. So knowledgeable people audit knowledgeable doers.
Do one last one.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is amazing playbook. So my question is who can use this playbook? The reason I ask this question is I feel like if I represent an insurance company, I would think about step 1, 2, 3, right? But I feel like step 4 dictates step 1. And step 4 may be used, a regulator may have to clarify what they are going to audit.
Yes. Step 4 is for Philip. Yes, you need. Because there are so many different fairness criteria, you probably also need some guidance from regulator, which one to use, or the stakeholders sit down and let's say this is the one that we will use for our lines of business. And I'm sure Malika later on will also talk about David in their session. They will also talk about the complexity of the area. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you all for putting up with the organizers.
Yeah,
We're going to
thank
get
you.
away from it after lunch, but I think we should pause at this point and give everybody time to get to lunch.
Yeah. Thank you.